A girl vanishes, leaving behind only silence. Her brother, who cannot speak, is the only witness. For 28 years, his only message is a haunting 5-note whistle. Police called it meaningless grief. They were wrong. That sound wasn't a memory. It was a password, and the secret it unlocks is terrifying. Some memories are not seen. They are not held in a faded photograph or a worn-out piece of clothing. Some memories are heard. They exist as echoes in the quiet places, a melody only 1 or 2 people in the world can understand. In the small town of Oak Haven, Washington, nestled under the perpetual gray veil of the Pacific Northwest sky, such a memory was born in the summer of 1995. It was a sound that would be lost for 28 years, a sound that would become a ghost. Before we dive into the silence that fell over this town, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below, and let's remember this story together. Oak Haven was a town built on timber and tradition, a place where the forest felt less like a boundary and more like a presence, breathing its damp, pine-scented breath over everything. It was a place where people knew their neighbors' histories, and everyone knew the Jenkins family. They were quiet, kept to themselves, their lives defined by a gentle, unspoken sorrow. Their 10-year-old son, Leo, was a boy who lived in a world of his own making. Diagnosed with autism at a young age, Leo rarely spoke. His world was not one of words, but of patterns, textures, and sounds. His guide, his translator, his only real bridge to the outside world was his older sister, Sarah. At 19, Sarah Jenkins possessed a patience that seemed ancient. She worked part-time at the Riverside Diner, her tips saved in a jar for a future she dreamed of, one that involved studying botany at a state college. But her real life, her true purpose, was Leo. She understood her silence. She saw the intricate world he built for herself and did not try to invade it, but to join him in it. Their shared language was the call of a bird. The whisper-winged warbler was a shy, elusive creature, its 5-note song a complex and beautiful piece of music that rarely graced the ears of Oak Haven's residents. Sarah, an amateur naturalist, had spent a month with a recorder and a field guide, learning to mimic its call perfectly. She taught it to Leo. It became their secret. When he was agitated, she would whistle the 5 notes, a soft, melodic phrase that cut through his distress. He learned to whistle it back. It was their way of saying, "I'm here, I see you, you are safe." On the evening of October 12, 1995, Sarah finished her shift at the diner. The police report states she clocked out at 9:04 p.m. She untied her apron, waved goodbye to her boss, and pedaled her blue Schwinn bicycle down the familiar road toward Ohm. The autumn air was cold, carrying the smell of wood smoke and wet leaves. She was never seen again. The initial hours were a blur of confusion, then rising panic. Her parents called the police when she was an hour late. A frantic search began. Neighbors and volunteers fanning out with flashlights, their beams cutting nervously into the encroaching darkness. They found her bicycle at the edge of the Blackwood State Forest, lying on its side in a bed of ferns. The front wheel was still spinning slowly, as if she had just stepped away. But there was no Sarah. No scream, no sign of struggle, no sound. Just gone. The only witness was Leo. He had been sitting on the porch, waiting for her, as he did every evening. When a young, earnest detective named Miles Corbin tried to question him, the boy was inconsolable. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't make eye contact. He just sat there, rocking back and forth, and from his lips came the only sound he could muster: a haunting 5-note whistle, the call of the whisper-winged warbler. The police dismissed it. A sound, they said, is not evidence. A sound cannot tell you where a girl has gone. The silence that followed Sarah's disappearance would settle over the Jenkins family like a shroud, and for 28 years, the only thing that broke it was the ghost of a song, whistled by a boy who refused to forget. A sound they called meaningless. But they were wrong. In the days that followed, the search for Sarah Jenkins consumed Oakhaven. State police set up a command post in the high school gymnasium, its polished floors soon scuffed by the boots of grim-faced men and women speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Cadaver dogs were brought in, their hopeful, energetic barks at the start of the trail eventually giving way to confused whines and defeated whimpers as they found no scent, no trace of Sarah past the spot where her bicycle lay. Volunteers, hundreds of them, fanned out across the Blackwood State Forest, their bright orange vests like tiny, futile flames against the immense, indifferent green of the woods. The forest wasn't finished. It held its secrets tightly. Detective Miles Corbin, only 5 years on the force, felt the case sink into his bones. It was his first major investigation as lead, and the pressure was a physical weight. He felt a strange theatrical gravity to it all, as if he were a character cast in a play whose ending was already written in stone, a tragedy he was powerless to rewrite. He reviewed the facts until they were worn smooth in his mind. Sarah was a good kid. No enemies, no secret boyfriend, no history of running away. She was the anchor of her family, the kind of person who leaves a void so total it feels like a physical law has been broken. Every lead was a dead end. The diner staff confirmed she left alone at her usual time. No one saw a suspicious vehicle. No one heard a scream. The investigation inevitably circled back to the only person who was there, in a sense: Leo. Corbin felt a deep, frustrating pity for the boy. He sat with him for hours in the sterile interview room at the station, a space that felt profoundly wrong for a child like Leo. He brought him drawing paper and colored pencils. Leo ignored them. He brought him a glass of water. Leo didn't touch it. "Leo," Corbin would say, his voice gentle, "we just want to find your sister. We want to bring Sarah home. Did you see anything? Did you hear a car?" In response, Leo would only look at a point on the wall just past Corbin's shoulder and whistle. The 5-note melody was pure, clear, and maddeningly repetitive. It wasn't a child's aimless tune. It felt practiced, deliberate. A psychologist was brought in, who explained that Leo was likely experiencing extreme trauma and had retreated into a repetitive behavior, a self-soothing mechanism. The sound, the expert concluded, was meaningless, a symptom of grief, not a clue. But here is a question for all of us. When a person cannot speak our language, how do we decide which of their sounds are meaningless and which are desperate messages we are simply failing to decode? Corbin wanted to believe the expert, but a part of him couldn't. The precision of the whistle felt like an attempt at communication that he was simply too ignorant to understand. On a gut feeling he couldn't explain, he recorded the sound on a small microcassette recorder, a desperate act of a detective with nothing else to go on. He played it for Sarah's parents. Her mother broke down sobbing. "It's their bird," she wept. "It was their special secret." But a secret language between siblings wasn't probable cause.
As the weeks turned into a month, the search wound down. The media packed up their vans, and the town's sympathy began to curdle, as it so often does, into a quiet, insidious suspicion. The family was strange. The boy was strange. Maybe they knew more than they were saying. The Jenkins family, already isolated by their grief, retreated further, drawing the blinds on their small house as if to shut out the world that had stolen their daughter, and now judged their pain.
Leo's whistling became a source of local legend, the sad, unnerving soundtrack to a tragedy that Oakhaven was trying its best to forget. Time moves differently around a cold case. It doesn't heal. It calcifies. The sharp edges of grief don't soften. They just get buried under layers of quiet routine and forced acceptance. For 28 years, the file on Sarah Jenkins' disappearance did just that, gathering dust in the archives of the Oakhaven Police Department. Officially, the case remained open. Practically, it was a ghost, a story told to new recruits as a cautionary tale about the ones that get away. Detective Miles Corbin retired in 2015 after a respectable, if unremarkable, career. He'd solved dozens of cases, but Sarah's was the one that followed him home. It was the question mark at the end of his career. He felt like an actor who had played his part in the first act, but the playwright had died before finishing the script, leaving him forever in the unresolved quiet. On his last day, he made a copy of her entire file, a breach of protocol he justified as a penance. He kept it in a locked filing cabinet in his basement, next to his fly fishing gear. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was still, he'd pull out the microcassette tape and listen to the recording of a 10-year-old boy whistling a bird call. The sound was a splinter in his memory, a reminder of his own failure to understand a language spoken right in front of him. In Oakhaven, the Jenkins family endured. The truth is, there is no word in our language for what they did. It was more than survival and less than living. Sarah's parents aged, their faces etched with a grief that had become a permanent part of their features. They never moved. They kept Sarah's room exactly as she had left it, a perfect, heartbreaking time capsule from 1995. It became a shrine of quiet hope and painful memory. And Leo grew up. The whispering boy became the quiet man. He graduated from high school through a special program and, to everyone's surprise, found his calling. He became a reference archivist at the county library, a job that suited his nature perfectly. In the hushed, orderly world of books and microfiche, surrounded by information that could be cataloged and contained, he found a semblance of peace. He still rarely spoke in full sentences, communicating mostly in short, direct phrases when necessary. But his primary language remained the sound from his childhood. The library patrons grew accustomed to it. As he wheeled carts of books through the stacks, or repaired the spine of a worn volume, they would hear it, the soft, 5-note whistle. It was no longer haunting. It was just Leo, a part of the library's unique atmosphere, like the smell of old paper and binding glue. He was a kind, gentle man, but he lived behind a wall of his own making, a wall built of silence and a single recurring melody.
The town of Oakhaven had long since decided the story of Sarah Jenkins was a tragedy with no final chapter. They had buried it, as communities do, under new buildings, new families, and the sheer, relentless weight of passing years. But the sound, the memory, was not buried. It was just waiting for someone else to hear it. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, even after 28 years buried in the ground. But it rarely surfaces where you expect it. It doesn't follow a logical path. The earth gives back what it takes, but it often does so in a different place, through the hands of a stranger. This is the story of the accidental breakthrough. The moment a new character walks onto the stage, unaware that the lines he is about to speak will change the ending for everyone. Hundreds of miles south of Oakhaven, in the remote, moss-draped forests of rural Oregon, a different kind of archivist was at work. Ben Carter didn't deal in books. He dealt in sound. He was a bioacoustic specialist, a sound recordist who created immersive audio documentaries about the natural world.
His current project was ambitious: to capture the pure soundscapes of the Pacific Northwest, the acoustic environments untouched by the drone of highways or the whine of machinery. He had hiked for 2 days to reach this specific location, a tract of old-growth forest bordering a large, privately owned territory that was little more than a blank space on his topographical map. Setting up his sensitive parabolic microphones, he settled in for a long evening of recording. For hours, the forest offered its usual symphony: the sigh of wind through ancient firs, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the undergrowth. Then, just as the last light was bleeding from the sky, he heard it. It was unmistakable. A clear 5-note call, melodic and complex. Ben's heart hammered in his chest. He knew that sound. It was the whisper-winged warbler. He had spent years trying to get a clean recording of one. According to every field guide and ornithological database, the bird's known habitat was hundreds of miles north, primarily in specific regions of Washington state. To find one here was a monumental discovery. It was the kind of find that could make a career. He carefully adjusted his equipment, holding his breath, praying the bird would call again. It did. Once, twice, 3 times. Perfect, pristine recordings. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. He packed up his gear in the dark, his mind racing. He pictured the article in the Ornithology Journal, the acclaim from his peers. He had stumbled upon a previously unknown migratory path, a whole new territory for a famously elusive species. He had no way of knowing that the sound he had captured was not the beginning of a scientific breakthrough, but the end of a 28-year-old silence. He thought he had recorded the sound of a rare bird. In truth, he had recorded a key. He was a character entering the story from the wings, holding the one prop that could solve the entire mystery, and he didn't even know the play had started. The exhilaration of the discovery stayed with Ben Carter all the way back to his small, soundproofed studio in Portland. He treated the audio file with the reverence of a holy relic, loading it onto his high-end system and donning his professional-grade headphones. He closed his eyes, ready to immerse himself in the soundscape, to isolate the perfect call of the whisper-winged warbler. He played it once. It was beautiful. He played it again. A tiny, dissonant thought flickered in his mind. Something was off. It was almost too perfect, too clean. Avian calls, even from the most skilled songbirds, have subtle organic imperfections. The tiny rasp of air passing through the syrinx, the slight variations in pitch and tempo. This was different. It was precise, almost mathematical in its consistency. He had the sudden, disorienting feeling that he wasn't listening to a recording, but to a line of dialogue that had been delivered flawlessly, take after take, until it was unnaturally perfect. Driven by a professional's unease, he pulled up the audio spectrograph software, transforming the sound into a visual image of frequencies and harmonics. The moment the graph rendered on his screen, the hair on his arms stood up. What he was looking at was not the spectrograph of a bird. A bird's call creates a dense, complex pattern of overlapping frequencies, a rich and slightly chaotic visual signature. This was a clean, pure sine wave with distinct, controlled overtones. It was the unmistakable signature of a human whistle. He zoomed in, running the analysis again. The software confirmed it. It highlighted the slight puff of breath at the beginning of the phrase and the slight tapering off at the end. Artifacts of human lungs and lips, not an avian vocal organ. It was a flawless imitation, the work of someone who had practiced for years, but it was undeniably human. A cold dread washed over him, replacing the thrill of discovery. This changed everything.
This wasn't a lost bird. It was a hidden person. Someone living deep in that remote forest, whistling the call of a bird that didn't belong there. He pulled up his maps again, staring at the blank space next to where he had been recording. The private territory. It was marked on a few older county maps with a single, unassuming name. The Glade. Who was out there? And why were they mimicking the song of a warbler from Washington? It felt intrusive, almost sinister. This was no longer a nature documentary. This felt like evidence. But of what? He had no idea. Unsettled and not knowing what else to do, Ben did what any modern person with an obscure, troubling question does. He turned to the internet. He posted the audio file and the spectrograph image on a niche online forum for ornithologists and bioacoustics experts. He titled the post, "Anomalous Human Mimicry of Setophaga murmurans Recorded in Central Oregon." He asked a simple question. Has anyone ever heard this before? He felt like he was sending a message in a bottle into a vast digital ocean, a small plea for context in a story he was only just beginning to realize he was a part of. For weeks, Ben Carter's post on the Avian Acoustics Forum generated little more than academic curiosity. A few professors debated the technical proficiency of the whistle. A hobbyist suggested it might be a prank by local teenagers. The trail was going cold. Ben was about to give up and delete the post, writing the whole thing off as an unsolvable rural oddity. He was a scientist, not a detective, and this anomaly felt like a distraction from his real work. He was a supporting character, and he knew it. His part in the story, he thought, was over.
But in every story of a long silence, there is an unwavering seeker, a person for whom the case is never cold, for whom the passage of time is not a comfort, but a constant nagging ache. This is the moral force of perseverance, the belief that hope is not a passive emotion, but an active, relentless pursuit. In a quiet suburb of Tacoma, a retired detective named Miles Corbin was indulging in his own online habits. Now in his late 60s, with a face full of lines that told the story of too many long nights and too many grim discoveries, Corbin had become an avid amateur birdwatcher. It was a peaceful hobby, a deliberate contrast to the world he had left behind. His evenings were often spent scrolling through birding forums, identifying species from grainy photos posted by other enthusiasts. On a Tuesday night, he clicked on a link to the Avian Acoustics subforum, a place he rarely visited. The title of Ben's post caught his eye: Setophaga murmurans, the whisper-winged warbler. It was a bird he knew, not from his birding books, but from a dusty case file locked in his basement. He felt a familiar cold knot tighten in his stomach. He read the post, his eyes scanning over the technical details until he saw the embedded audio player. He clicked it. The sound that filled his small office was not just a sound. It was a memory, perfectly preserved. The 5 clear, melodic notes were a ghost that flew out of his computer speakers and straight into the darkest corner of his professional life. It was the whistle, the one the whispering boy Leo Jenkins had made over and over in that sterile interview room nearly 3 decades ago. It was the sound he had dismissed, the clue he had failed to understand. His heart hammered against his ribs. He played it again, then a 3rd time. There was no doubt. For 28 years, he had believed that sound was a random, grief-stricken tick. But here it was, recorded hundreds of miles away, in a different state, by a stranger. It wasn't random. It was real. It meant something. Corbin's hands trembled as he typed out a response, then deleted it. This was too sensitive for a public forum. He found Ben Carter's professional email address and composed a message, his old detective instincts kicking in, the language direct and urgent. Subject: Your recording of the warbler whistle, Mr. Carter. My name is Miles Corbin. I am a retired police detective. I believe your recording is connected to a 1995 missing person case I investigated in Oak Haven, Washington. The disappearance of a 19-year-old girl named Sarah Jenkins. Please call me. This is not a prank. It is critically important. He hit send. The unwavering seeker, dormant for years, was awake again. The case that had haunted his retirement was no longer cold. It was singing. This is the moment a story shifts. It's the point where a collection of disparate, forgotten facts, a boy's whistle, a missing girl, a strange recording, begin to magnetize, pulling together to form the first faint outline of the truth. It's at this moment that a case is no longer just a local tragedy. It becomes a chronicle. The characters, once adrift in their private grief, begin to realize they are part of a much larger narrative, one that is now, after decades of silence, finally moving toward its climax. Stay with me, because the story of what happens next is a testament to the fact that no detail is ever truly lost, and that a single sound can be enough to unravel a world of secrets. Miles Corbin's email landed in Ben Carter's inbox like a thunderclap. Within an hour, they were on the phone, two strangers connected by an auditory ghost. Ben, relieved and terrified in equal measure, sent Corbin the original high-fidelity audio file and the exact GPS coordinates of his recording location. Corbin, in turn, knew he couldn't act alone. He was a civilian now, a retiree with a box of old files. He needed someone with a badge, someone who wouldn't dismiss him as a sentimental old man chasing ghosts. He made a call to the Washington State Patrol's Cold Case Unit. He was put through to a detective named Isla Ramsey. Ramsey was sharp, methodical, and had a reputation for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. She listened patiently as Corbin laid out the story. The 1995 disappearance, the boy who whistled, and the impossible recording made a few weeks ago in Oregon. At first, Ramsey was skeptical. It was a long shot, built on a foundation of coincidence and intuition. But Corbin was a former detective, and his conviction was unwavering. On a hunch, she requested the original case file for Sarah Jenkins from the Oakhaven archives. It arrived in a dusty, accordion-style folder, smelling of old paper and forgotten time. She spent a day with it, immersing herself in the fading ink of the reports. She read about the abandoned bicycle, the fruitless search, the suspicions of the town. And then she found it. Corbin's original report on his interviews with Leo Jenkins. Tucked inside the folder was the microcassette tape, labeled Leo Jenkins, Interview 10159. Ramsey found an old player in the department's evidence storage. She slid the tape in and pressed play. The tinny, warped sound of the boy's whistle filled her office. She played it once, then played Ben Carter's crystal-clear digital recording. They were identical. Every answer, they say, is like a knife made of fog. You can feel the edge, but not see it. At that moment, Isla Ramsey felt the edge. The auditory totem now had a location. She pulled up a satellite map, cross-referencing Ben's GPS data with Oregon County records. There it was, a large, isolated parcel of land, hidden from the main road by miles of dense forest. A place called the Glade. The case of Sarah Jenkins was officially reactivated. The sound that had been dismissed as meaningless was now the only lead they had. It was the only crack in a wall of silence that had stood for nearly 30 decades. And she was about to push. A place like the Glade doesn't exist by accident. It is built on intention, on privacy, and on secrets. Detective Isla Ramsey discovered this as she began to dig into the history of the remote Oregon property. On paper, it was almost invisible. It was owned by a private trust called the Sanctuary Foundation, established in the early 1970s. The foundation's stated purpose was vague and benign: to provide a space for holistic wellness, personal reflection, and retreat from the pressures of modern society. Ramsey found articles in old counterculture magazines from the 70s and 80s that shed a little more light. The Glade was founded by a man named Dr. Alistair Blackwood. Blackwood was a former university professor of psychology and philosophy, a charismatic intellectual who had broken away from academic, disillusioned with what he called the identity sickness of the modern world. He preached a philosophy of ego dissolution. He believed that personal trauma, unhappiness, and societal ills were caused by the rigid attachment to one's personal history and name. True peace, he argued, could only be achieved by shedding that identity and being reassigned a new, purer self. It's a seductive idea, isn't it? To simply erase the past and start over. But what is the cost of such a peace? And who gets to decide which parts of you are erased? The articles portrayed him as a visionary, a guru, creating a utopia where people could find true freedom by becoming tabula rasa, blank slates. The community was entirely self-sufficient, growing its own food, generating its own power, and, most importantly, keeping the outside world at a firm distance. There were no public records of its residents. Legally, they didn't live there. They were on a perpetual wellness retreat. The Sanctuary Foundation was a legal fortress, expertly designed to keep the world out and its secrets in. The sinister undertones were impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a commune. It was a place where people disappeared on purpose. Ramsey's team ran the foundation's name through federal databases, looking for connections to other missing persons cases. They found dozens of potential links over the decades. People who had expressed interest in alternative lifestyles, who had drained their bank accounts, and who had then vanished, their families left with no answers. But the connections were all circumstantial. There was never enough evidence for law enforcement to breach the Glade's walls. This wasn't just a case of disappearance. This was removal, replacement, erasure. The bird call was the first crack in that wall. Ramsey theorized that it wasn't just a random sound. In a community obsessed with creating a new culture from scratch, it had to have a purpose. Was it a signal? A form of communication? A way for members to identify each other outside their borders? The thought was chilling. The whistle wasn't just a memory of Sarah Jenkins. It might have been the very reason she was taken. She could have overheard it, recognized it as something that didn't belong in Oakhaven, and been silenced before she could ask why. A terrible, ironic possibility began to form in Ramsey's mind. Sarah might have been taken because of the very secret she shared only with her brother. She was a character who stumbled into the wrong story, and the only way for the author to fix the plot was to remove her from it. Detective Ramsey knew she couldn't get a search warrant for the Glade based on a 28-year-old bird call. Any formal approach would be met by a team of high-priced lawyers, and the residents would have all the time in the world to hide whatever or whoever was inside. She needed a way in, a key. It was Miles Corbin who proposed the radical idea. "The sound is the key," he said over the phone, his voice filled with a conviction that bordered on obsession. "We don't need to break down the door. We need the person who knows the password." Corbin felt a strange sense of clarity, the kind a character gets when he finally understands his role in the story. His part wasn't to solve the crime. His part was to guard the clue until the right moment. The plan was audacious and risky. They would approach the gate not as police, but as lost travelers. And they would bring Leo Jenkins with them. Ramsey was hesitant. Leo was a civilian, a vulnerable one at that. To bring him to the potential doorstep of his sister's abductor felt like a profound ethical violation.
She drove to Oakhaven to meet him herself. Leo was in his late 30s now, a tall, quiet man with his sister's kind eyes. He lived in the same small house, now empty since his parents had passed away a few years prior. Corbin was there, acting as a gentle intermediary. Ramsey explained the situation carefully, laying out the recording from Oregon and their theory about the Glade. She didn't know if he would understand or if the trauma would be too much. Leo listened without speaking, his gaze fixed on a point beyond her. Then Corbin played the recording from Ben Carter's microphone. Leo's head snapped up. He looked directly at the speaker, his expression one of intense, focused recognition. For the first time, someone else was speaking his language. After a long silence, he looked at Corbin, then at Ramsey, and gave a single, firm nod. A few days later, a nondescript sedan pulled up the long, unpaved road leading to the entrance of the Glade. Ramsey and Corbin were in the front seats, dressed in civilian clothes. Leo was in the back. The gate was tall, made of heavy timber, with an intercom and a camera. A man dressed in simple homespun clothes emerged from a small guardhouse. His face was placid, his eyes calm but watchful. Ramsey rolled down her window. "Sorry to bother you," she began. "Our GPS died and we seem to be lost." The guard said nothing, his gaze sweeping over the car. Corbin nodded to Leo in the back seat. Leo took a deep breath, and as if 28 years had never passed, he whistled. The 5-note call of the whisper-winged warbler, pure and clear, echoed in the silent woods. The guard's placid expression vanished. His posture straightened, his eyes locking on to Leo. It was a look of instant recognition. After a moment, he brought his own lips together and whistled back. It was a different tune, a 2-note response. It wasn't a mimicry, it was a reply. A call and response. Corbin had been right, it was a password. Without another word, the guard turned and pushed a button. The heavy timber gate began to swing slowly inward, revealing a path into the world that had been hidden for half a century. As they drove through, Ramsey felt a chill. They weren't just entering a compound, they were stepping inside the story's final hidden chapter. The world inside the Glade was one of unsettling serenity. The path opened into a clearing with manicured gardens, simple wooden buildings, and wide green lawns. People dressed in the same earth-toned, simple clothing walked slowly along gravel paths or worked silently in vegetable patches. They smiled as the car passed, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. It was a place scrubbed clean of urgency, of clutter, of individuality. It was the quietest place Ramsey had ever been. They were met by Dr. Alistair Blackwood himself. He was in his 80s now, but he stood tall, with a full head of white hair and eyes that were a piercing, intelligent blue. He was leaning on a carved wooden staff, and he exuded an aura of gentle, unshakable authority. He greeted them with a warm smile, showing no surprise at their arrival. "You are lost, and yet you have found your way," he said, his voice a smooth, calming baritone. "Welcome to Sanctuary. I am Alistair. Here, we have no need for the names that caused us pain in the other world." He was the perfect villain for this kind of story, Ramsey thought. The one who believes so deeply in his own righteousness that he cannot see the evil he creates. Monsters aren't just found in basements. Sometimes they live in gardens.
While Ramsey and Corbin kept Blackwood occupied, Leo, who had been silent since they arrived, began to wander away from the group, drawn toward a large walled garden at the edge of the main compound. No one stopped him. He seemed to be just another quiet soul moving through the landscape. He pushed open the heavy wooden gate and stepped inside. The garden was full of flowers, roses, lavender, and dozens of species Ramsey didn't recognize. A woman was kneeling by a flower bed, her back to him, carefully weeding around a cluster of vibrant blue blossoms. She was in her late 40s, her hair streaked with gray and tied back in a simple braid. Her face, when she turned slightly, was weathered by years in the sun, a stranger's face. But there was something in the line of her shoulders, the way she moved her hands in the soil, that was achingly familiar to him. Leo stood at the entrance to the garden and did the only thing he knew how to do. He took a breath and whistled. The 5 notes of the warbler's song. The woman froze. Her trowel dropped from her hand, clattering against the stone path. She remained motionless for a long moment, her shoulders trembling. Slowly, she rose to her feet and turned to face him. Her eyes were clouded with confusion, as if looking at him through a thick fog. He was a stranger to her, a man she had never seen before. But the sound had bypassed her mind and gone somewhere deeper. Leo looked at this strange woman who was and was not his sister. He whistled again, this time softer, more questioning. A flicker of something crossed her face, a crack in the serene, empty mask. A memory, buried for nearly 30 years, was fighting its way to the surface. Her lips parted, and a single, rusty word, a name she hadn't spoken in decades, escaped as a whisper. Leo? The single word, Leo, spoken in a voice hoarse from disuse, shattered the placid silence of the glade. It was the sound of a dam breaking. The woman, the person they called Serenity, stumbled back, her hands flying to her head, as if to contain a sudden violent storm. Memories, fractured and chaotic, flooded her mind. A blue bicycle, the smell of fries at a diner, a little boy's face waiting on a porch. Her name wasn't Serenity. It was Sarah. Detective Ramsey saw the commotion and moved in instantly. "Sarah?" she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Sarah Jenkins?" At the sound of her full name, the woman crumpled, sobbing uncontrollably. The carefully constructed piece of serenity was gone, replaced by the overwhelming, long-buried grief of Sarah. Leo rushed to her side, not speaking, but placing a hand on her shoulder, a simple, grounding touch that bridged a gap of 28 years. He was no longer just the boy who whistled. He was the final clue, the living proof that her old life, her real life, had existed. Ramsey now had her witness. The cover story was dropped. She faced a stunned Dr. Blackwood, her badge now in her hand. "Alistair Blackwood," she said, her voice cold and clear. "You're under arrest for kidnapping and false imprisonment." The unraveling was swift and catastrophic for the Glade. With Sarah's testimony, Ramsey secured the warrant she needed. State and federal agents descended on the compound. What they discovered was a system of psychological abuse more sophisticated and insidious than they could imagine. Blackwood and his inner circle of keepers had perfected a method of identity erasure. They targeted vulnerable individuals, luring them in with peace and belonging. Once inside, they used a combination of isolation, dietary control, repetitive drills, and powerful psychotropic drugs derived from the plants in their own garden to break down their residents' sense of self. The bird call was a crucial tool in this process. It was a mnemonic trigger, a key, as Blackwood called it, used to anchor the new assigned identities. Each new resident was given a unique call, drilled into them until it became second nature.
It was used in daily rituals, as a greeting, and as a way for the keepers to exert control. Sarah's abduction had been a terrible accident. A recruiter for the Glade, operating near Oakhaven, had been using the whisper-winged warbler call to communicate with another member. Sarah, a budding naturalist, overheard it and recognized it as being wildly out of place. She had innocently mentioned it to the recruiter, asking if he was a fellow birdwatcher. Seeing her as a risk, a loose thread who could unravel their secret network, the recruiter had abducted her and brought her to Blackwood. He didn't want to kill her. He wanted to erase her. And for 28 years, he had almost succeeded. The girl who knew too much became another nameless face in the garden, another of his children reborn in silence. Her story was erased, her character written out, until her brother's impossible memory forced a rewrite. The news about the Glade broke like a tidal wave. The story of the Garden of Forgotten Names was broadcast across the country. For dozens of families, it was the end of decades of agonizing uncertainty, but the answers they received were a new kind of horror. Their missing loved ones, sons, daughters, spouses, had been alive all this time, living as hollowed-out shells just a few hours' drive away. The reunion scenes at the edge of the compound were a gut-wrenching mix of relief and profound tragedy, as families tried to reconnect with people who barely recognized them. How do you reintroduce yourself to someone whose memory of you has been systematically erased? But the heart of the story remained with Sarah and Leo Jenkins. The journey home was not a celebration. Sarah was no longer the confident 19-year-old girl who dreamed of studying plants. She was a 47-year-old woman grappling with a chasm in her life, a 28-year void filled with a false peace and a stolen identity. She was quiet, disoriented, and frightened of a world that had become loud, fast, and alien to her. She looked out the car window at the passing scenery, not as a woman returning home, but as a character reading the final pages of a book about her own life, a book she couldn't remember writing. The healing, if it could be called that, was slow and complex. Sometimes healing doesn't look like a happy ending. Sometimes it looks like surviving long enough to find your name again. For Sarah, the process was agonizing. Simple things, a television, a cell phone, the choices in a grocery store were overwhelming. Her memories returned in jagged, painful shards, often triggered by a smell or a sound. Leo was her anchor. He, who had lived his life in silence, was now the keeper of her past. He would sit with her for hours, not speaking, but just being present. He would bring her old photo albums, pointing to pictures of her as a teenager, gently reintroducing her to the person she had been. He brought her a field guide to birds, and her hands, so used to tending Blackwood's flowers, trembled as she traced the illustrations. One afternoon, sitting on the porch of their childhood home, the same porch where he had waited for her on that October night, Sarah looked at her brother. The confusion in her eyes was momentarily replaced by a deep, heartbreaking clarity. "He took everything," she whispered. "He took my whole life." Leo didn't answer with words. He simply looked at her, and with a small, sad smile, he placed his hand over hers. He was her bridge back, just as she had once been his. It was not a return to how things were. That was impossible. It was the slow, painful beginning of something new, a life pieced together from the fragments of what a monster had tried to destroy. And at the center of it all was a sound, a melody, that had once been a secret, then a lament, then a key, and was now, finally, a lullaby. The trial of Dr. Alistair Blackwood was a media spectacle, but the man himself remained unrepentant.
He saw himself not as a kidnapper, but as a savior, and he defended his philosophy from the stand with a chilling, intellectual arrogance. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, a frail old man who would die behind the very walls he despised. The verdict, however, exposed a vast network of recruiters and benefactors, leading to further arrests and shining a harsh light on the dark underbelly of unregulated wellness and self-help movements. The sanctuary case led to the passage of new federal laws, known informally as Sarah's Law, which tightened oversight on residential retreats and established a national database for long-term missing persons believed to have joined alternative communities. Her legacy became one of protection, a shield forged from her own stolen years. But for Sarah and Leo, justice was not something that happened in a courtroom. It was something that happened in the quiet moments. It was Sarah learning to drive a car, Leo helping her study for the exam. It was Sarah enrolling in a community college course on horticulture, her old dream returning in a new, more fragile form. They were characters who had survived the story, and now had the difficult, unwritten task of living in the aftermath. The narrative was over, but their lives were not. One evening, a year after her return, they were sitting in the backyard as dusk settled, the sky turning a deep shade of violet. A bird called from the trees at the edge of the yard. It wasn't the warbler, just a common sparrow. Leo looked at Sarah and, for the first time since she came home, he whistled, the 5 familiar notes, soft and questioning. It was the sound that had connected them in childhood, the sound that had been his lonely lament for decades, the sound that had finally brought her home. Sarah listened, a faint smile touching her lips. She took a breath and whistled back, the 2-note reply she had heard the guard use at the gate of the glade. It was no longer a password to a prison. It was their language again, reclaimed, rebuilt. Some echoes fade, but some, the ones that carry the weight of love and the strength of a bond that could not be broken, remain. They remind us that a name can be stolen, a life can be derailed, but the core of who we are, the memories that truly define us, will always fight their way back to the surface. They remind us why we must keep telling these stories, to help uncover the truths they tried to bury, and to make sure that no name like that of Sarah Jenkins stays forgotten. What do you think? Did this story have a happy ending? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The story of Sarah and Leo Jenkins reminds us that even after decades of silence, the truth can find a way to be heard, and that no bond is ever truly broken. It is a testament to why we must continue to listen to the quietest voices. Thank you for joining us on Unfound. If you believe that no name should stay forgotten, please subscribe to Unfound and hit the notification bell to join our community. We'll see you in the next chronicle, where another story is waiting to be told.